Hi, I'm Jane Velez Mitchell here in New York City with our mascot Foxy, and we're talking about a very serious issue. I am joined by Donny Moss of theirturn.net, who has written extensively on the issue, the controversy of cruel live animal exports from Australia. And we are joined from Sydney, Australia by Tanya Harding, who is an Australian animal activist. Tell us what's going on, Tanya, with these live exports of massive numbers of farm animals from Australia to other countries, and what is new about this purported deal to export many, massive numbers of cows to China?
Massive live animal exports. So at the moment we're exporting about 1 million animals a year all over the globe. Massive long journeys to the Middle East, huge animal welfare problems, placing these paddock-based animals into ships, into very tight conditions in ships for weeks on end. And then we have problems with the slaughter at the other end. Obviously they're in other countries and we can't control it. And now the new emerging thing is that we want to export, what they're saying is about 1 million cows a year to China. And we can't control the markets that we have, the existing markets, and we're opening this massive new market in China. It's just shocking.
Donny Moss of theirturn.net, I know that you have been researching this. You've written several articles on it. I mean, the cruelty is obvious. The idea that you're going to take an animal and stick this animal, a farm animal, onto ships with thousands and thousands of other animals to languish on the high seas, only to get slaughtered when they get to the other end. It's beyond barbaric. What have you learned?
Well, Australia insists that there are safeguards in place. There's a regulation, I'm going to read it to you, the Export Supply Chain Assurance System, that allegedly protects these animals once they get to these countries where they're exported in the Middle East and Asia. However, Jane, Animals Australia has documented time and again footage of these animals being tortured in some of these countries where there are no or very few laws to protect these animals. So, as Tanya mentioned, now we're opening it up to China, which we all know has very poor animal protection laws, and it just means even more animals instead of fewer animals who are going to be abused not only on their horrendous journey to these countries, but at their destinations themselves.
Well, what is astounding to me is that so few people know about this. In the United States, it's not well known that Australia has this massive live farm animal export industry in place, despite the controversies. I happened to run into a couple of tourists from Australia just today, and I discussed it with them. And I said, please, when you get back to Australia, voice your concern, and they said they would. But Tanya, is this a huge controversy in Australia?
Jane, it is a huge controversy. We've had some really great exposés on the 7:30 report, but I think that people are just feeling really hopeless about it. I mean, we keep exposing the cruelty. We keep seeing these unbelievably horrific images. We just had one recently, less than a month ago, the Eid market, horrendous images of sheep being abused.
Well,
but people just feel that...
Describe it.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Describe these horrendous images.
So sheep they call it a leakage. When sheep exit the SCAS system that Donny was referring to earlier, they call it a leakage. 500 sheep came out of the system that supposedly assures their humane treatment and their humane slaughter, and ended up in the notoriously cruel Al Rai market. And there were 500 sheep there with no water, sweltering. If you go on the Animals Australia webpage, you can see these images of these sheep dying in the heat, desperate. And they end up in car boots, being slaughtered in backyards, the most horrendous death you can imagine. And they will have endured 6 weeks on a ship just to get there, just to get to that point.
When you find out about animal exploitation, and it's been a rule that I've noticed since I first began doing animal coverage many years ago, follow the money. Generally, when animals are being treated horrifically, somebody's making money. And so this is a huge industry, Donny, in Australia, just an absolutely massive industry. And I'll throw this to Tanya. Who's making money and what can be done?
The live exporters are making money, and it's actually shown that a very small proportion of farms are making a very big amount of money on live export, but there's a few small farms that are making massive amounts of money, and the live exporters are making huge money because they avoid all the Australian labour costs. They ship these animals overseas, and then cheaper labour processes the animals, and then they can make huge profits on them. And also our government is making money on this.
Oh, tell us about that. Okay, you're saying what's in it for the Australian government? I mean, this is obviously bad publicity. Australia relies a lot on tourism. A lot of people are really outraged when they find out that this is going on. Why would the Australian government be a part of this?
It means billions of dollars to the Australian economy, but it is only a small part of the red meat market. It's about 7% of our red meat exports, so it really doesn't make sense for us to continue with this. New Zealand banned live exports specifically because of the damage to their reputation, and I think we need to do the same.
Well, let me say this. If there was one thing that people who care about animals could do here in the United States, in Canada, or wherever they're watching around the world, what would you tell them to do? And I'll address that to Donny Moss.
Jane, I got disconnected for 1 second. Can you repeat that?
If there's one thing that you would urge people to do to stop this live animal export industry that's going on in Australia with these animals trapped on these ships for long periods of time, what would you suggest people do?
Well, two things. The activists who live in the countries where these animals are exported to should protest locally, should raise awareness locally of what's happening. And that's exactly what's being done in Israel. There's a movement to stop live imports into that country. And other activists in the other countries where these animals are coming into can do the same. But for the rest of us, Animals Australia has a page of actions that people can take. Among them are contacting the Australian Embassy in Washington, D.C. I've posted that information on the live export stories on theirturn.net. Please, we need to support activists who are in Australia in their efforts to curb this horrific industry.
Donny, describe what these animals go through when they are put on these massive ships that head off into the high seas, because I understand that sometimes they haven't even been allowed to disembark because of whatever problem, and they end up languishing on these ships for God only knows how long, and it sounds like something out of the worst nightmares I can't even imagine.
Well, we have heard instances, Jane, in which disease has spread on these ships, and the importing countries wouldn't allow them to come into the port. Those are exceptions. The greater problem, and that which affects the vast majority or all of these animals, is that, as you said, they languish on these ships for weeks at a time on their journey from Australia to these countries in the Middle East and Asia. And if that's not bad enough, Jane, living in their own waste, and if that's not bad enough, once they arrive in these countries, they often have days, if not weeks, of additional abuse before they're slaughtered. And we know that the slaughterhouses where they're being slaughtered are not regulated in the way that Australia insists that they are.
So, Tanya, you are in Sydney. Tell us about the movement in Sydney, Australia, to stop these live animal exports of farm animals to other countries.
First off, I'd like to say thank you to the Americans who've been contributing to the Animals Australia campaign, because they have helped get up some billboards in Sydney that are showing the truth about live export. There's Americans right now getting behind that campaign, and that's fantastic. So Animals Australia are putting up billboards in the hope to shame politicians and show them how much damage to our reputation live export really is doing. It's been a very long campaign, 20 years for some people, but we're still fighting it. There's people going out, tabling, handing out leaflets,
Tanya, let me say this. It seems to be getting worse with this new deal. How did you learn about this purported deal to export, I don't know how many, but massive amounts of cows to China? Do you have any indication of how many cows will be exported and any details on this? Because that is just horrifying.
They're talking numbers up to 1 million cows. Up to 1 million cows a year, and that is a massive number to manage and to ensure that they all arrive healthy and well, and we know that is
let's not even say ensure they all arrive. There's no ensuring 1 million cows are going to arrive anywhere when they've been on the high seas. That's like saying let's ensure that people who are deprived of oxygen and water are going to do fine. It's obscene. But go ahead.
You're absolutely right. There is no way to ensure that 1 million cows can travel that journey and then be slaughtered in a way that we feel is acceptable. It's impossible. Exactly right.
You know, this is what upsets me, Donny, is that it seems like the more people protest, the bigger these deals are. 1 million cows to China?
Jane, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's backed by both of the major political parties in Australia. That is a huge nut to crack. I've been contacted by activists in Australia who have said if we really want to end live exports, we need to boycott the country. If tourists don't go there, they're going to lose a lot more money than they're making from live exports.
Well, let me say this. I'm a tourist. I travel all around the world. I have over the course of my life. I've been to Australia. I've been to Sydney. And I would not go back. If this is what they're doing, I, as an American, I'm not going to go back, and I would urge other Americans, do not go back. Let's start it right now. Let's start a Boycott Australia Until Live Animal Exports End campaign. What do you say, Donny Moss of theirturn.net?
Look, it's easy for us to get behind that. I think it's a great idea. You know, will all activists on the ground support that strategy? I'm not sure. Jane, one of the things that I haven't mentioned yet is that a solution proposed by some of the local animal welfare groups is to curb or end live exports by substituting it with sending the meat instead of sending live bodies to these foreign countries. So if these animals could be slaughtered locally, it would spare them the additional misery of weeks at sea and unregulated slaughter abroad.
Well, you know that I'm a vegan, I don't eat animals, and I know you, Donny Moss, are a vegan and you don't eat animals. I don't know whether you're a vegan, Tanya Harding, but what I would say is that this is one of the reasons I'm a vegan, because there's no really good solution when it comes to killing. Killing is killing, and it's not a pretty thing. But this is making it really... It's Dante's Inferno. It's taking it into a new level of barbarity. So I think that that would be a better solution. It'd be better to send the meat, to kill the animals in Australia and send the meat to China than to let them be tortured in this manner and then die.
Absolutely.
Well, so what about that? Is that a campaign that can be started in Australia? Presumably, they're still going to make money. Presumably, if they sell the meat, whoever's got a hold of these cows and producing these cows can still make money because they're sending a product. So why not do that?
That's a very good question, Jane. And New Zealand, that's exactly what New Zealand is doing. They send all of their meat chilled instead of live exporting. They did have a live export market that they ended a few years ago, as I said, because of the damage to their clean, green reputation. And I think we need to follow down the same path. Absolutely.
Well, what achieved the live animal export ban in New Zealand? Because maybe that can be mirrored for Australia.
Yeah, it was politicians understanding that the damage to their reputation, their international reputation as a clean, green exporter, that was what really made them go, okay, we want to be in the market for premium, and live export is not a premium product. It's a low-end product. It's the cows that are old, that are end of their lives in dairying or end of their lives in wool, and they're making a little bit of money on these animals, and it's not worth it for us if we want to be in that premium market, and that's what our politicians.
By the way, that's another reason why I don't wear wool and I don't drink dairy products, because it's not, people have this fancy notion that, oh, the wool is just cut off the sheep and the sheep are fine. No, it's part of an entire exploitation of the animal that goes from the beginning of their lives, Donnie, to the end of their lives.
Yes, Jane, one of the things you just mentioned I have to address, and that is the reason why some of these animals are exported alive, and that is because in some of the destination countries, they want to slaughter the animals using kosher law or halal law. Apparently, there's more money in it for all parties if the animals are exported live.
All right, we lost Donnie for a second, but I want to say right here, right now, janeunchained.com is calling for a boycott of Australia until they end their live animal export. I am urging Americans, Canadians, people from around the world, if you care about animals, tell the Canadian Embassy in Washington. We're going to give you all the action points. And also just don't go. Don't spend your tourist dollars. That is really the best way to get the message across. Apparently there was a similar campaign in New Zealand. New Zealand has now joined the 21st century and is behaving in a civilized fashion as a result of this campaign. And I believe we can end live animal export in Australia. And of course, this also illustrates beyond just the issue of live animal export, which is a horrific issue affecting millions and millions of innocent animals, farm animals like cows and sheep, but it also highlights really what goes on behind the scenes in terms of meat and dairy and wool and leather. So think about that as a consumer when you're making your shopping choices. So I want to give you a final chance, if you could, just from Australia, speaking from me, what would you like to tell the American people, the Canadian people, and all the other people watching around the world?
If you're choosing to boycott Australia or boycott Australian wool, let Australia know. Make sure your ambassador knows and that Australian politicians know what you're doing and why you're doing it. You've got to let them know that the damage to our reputation is going to be irrecoverable from live export.
And Donnie, final word from you. And of course, we want everybody to go to Animals Australia. What's the website exactly? All right, we lost Donnie. But let me say this. Go to Animals Australia. Google Animal Australia. Google Animals Australia. Get involved in this campaign. Now, we have little Foxy, and Donnie has little Max, because we want to remind people what we're talking about. And the cows and the sheep and the pigs that we're talking about are just as innocent, and they are just as filled with emotion and fear, the capacity for fear. They're every bit as sentient as your dog or cat. So again, officially, I am calling for a boycott, a tourism boycott of Australia, until the Australian government shuts down the live animal export industry. And we very much urge the government of Australia to reconsider this purported plan to export up to 1 million cows a year to China alive. That is barbaric, and it is not worthy of the great country of Australia, which I have visited. Thank you so much. janeunchained.com, signing off until next time.